week, a few more will be logging in, but I'm going to go ahead and get started. Wendy is recording this so that folks can refer back to it. Thanks for being here. It's good to see everybody. Let's see. So I'm sharing my screen, and today's session is all about drafting strategies. We're really refining and getting down to those draft strategies that are going to be proposed to city staff in the roundtable for final revisions before it goes out to the community for outreach and engagement. So today the objectives are understanding those community priorities, really figuring out how to connect the priorities to our climate action and resilience strategies through applying that equity screening tool, and then preparing those draft strategies, like I said. When we do go into our breakouts, again, we're really aiming for consensus. We want to get to that point where everyone it says what we want it to say, and we can move forward, but definitely open to new ideas. Speak for yourself. We're still following our same expectations. In terms of the draft structure, we've made it all the way down to strategies, and I know that it's been hard to kind of understand the difference between an objective and a strategy and the implementation level, but the way that's been helpful to me, the objective is the long-term aims we want to accomplish, organized into the different pathways, and then the strategies are those actions that are going to lead us toward the objectives. And then this summer we'll be working on the implementation pieces, which are the actual the elements that will help us implement, measure progress, and ensure accountability. So we're really getting at those smarty actions that will lead us toward our objectives. So this is exciting to see. We're making a lot of progress. We're all the way to the end of the plan development phase. The foundation setting and drafting strategies, we're at the end of that, and then next month will be the community engagement. This summer, like I said, refining the strategies after it comes back from with the community feedback, and adding in the implementation plans, another phase of community engagement in the fall, and then we're going to finalize the plan and put it out there for council approval. So what we have been doing these past couple meetings is really refining these strategies, and there's been lots of brainstorming, lots of laundry lists, lots of discussions about best practices. But what we did was we took all of the information, the inputs, and then added your feedback and Richmond 300 objectives that relate to what we're trying to do here. And then we came up with draft strategies and ideas coming out of last week's meeting, or 2 weeks ago. And then between that meeting and this meeting, what staff has been doing is taking all of that, combining duplicate ideas, moving strategies into other working groups if it makes more sense somewhere else, really doing a lot of deep thinking about how to roll these up into strategies that make sense. So for today, we are going to be taking that revised strategy list that came out at the last meeting and refining it using that SMARTY process. So don't worry about the measurable and time bound at this point. Those are, like I said, going to come out in the implementation phase, but we do want to make sure that these strategies are strategic, ambitious, and realistic. And then, of course, the equity tool, the equity screening tool, will help us include more concepts that will make them inclusive and equitable. So this just shows you the 4 stages of the strategy drafting process, and we are getting towards the end. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Brianne to give you some examples of how we're pulling the community priorities into the strategies at this point.
Yeah, thanks, Dawn. So one of the things that we are going to work with you all on today is taking the ideas, like Dawn said, that you came up with at the last few meetings really, for strategies, and doing a few things with them. Among those, applying the equity screening tool that we worked with you all on back in January. And the equity screening tool is organized around our 7 community priorities, which we've talked about before. But as a reminder, these were some broad themes that we heard from community feedback that we collected mostly through the work of Kendra Norell, our community engagement coordinator, last summer when we started outreach for RVAgreen 2050. We went and focused on particularly groups and organizations and communities and neighborhoods that are at the front lines of climate change, which are also often the same historically disenfranchised communities suffering from a number of inequities across the board, and just ask them what their priorities and needs and wants and challenges are, separate from the climate conversation. And these were the things that we heard. And so what we want to do is make sure that our plan, which is a climate action and resilience plan, is relevant to the community, and that it is equitable. So we're going to be linking these community priorities to the strategies that we are drafting under each of our objectives. Dawn, you can go to the next slide. So what we've put together are a few examples of how these community priorities can be connected to climate action and resilience strategies. The first one here, again, just as an example, has to do with transportation. So you all might know a lot more about this than I do, but one of the things that we heard during our community listening process is that Richmonders want more access to jobs, and particularly well-paying jobs. And here in our region, we have a very small percentage of jobs that are accessible by things like transit, biking, and walking. And so if you don't have your own vehicle, it might be hard to have access to, a lot of job options. We also know that many Richmonders do not have access to a vehicle. We have about 15 or so % of our households here in the city that don't have a vehicle. We have another 40% or so that only have one vehicle. So if there's more than one working adult in the household, they can only access a job through other means. At the same time, on the climate action and resilience side, we definitely want to be thinking about how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the transportation sector, which is where we're seeing a lot of growth in emissions, actually. And so with strategies like increasing the availability and access to transit, we can provide more access to jobs while also reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. Dawn, you can go to the next one. So another example and some of these will be more or less relevant to this group. This one's around housing. And so one of the huge themes that we heard over and over again from the community last summer was the need for more affordable housing. We are not going to solve the affordable housing crisis with this plan, but there are elements that we can start to address through climate action and resilience. One of those is energy burden, which is the amount of the percentage of household income that households spend on things like energy and other utility bills. We know this is a contributing factor to eviction rates. And as you all probably know, we have a huge problem with eviction here in Richmond, particularly among communities of color and lower income communities. And so as we think about climate action strategies, we can do things like come up with ideas such as making housing, particularly in historically disenfranchised and low income communities, more energy efficient and more weatherized, which not only reduces greenhouse gas emissions and increases resilience to things like heat waves and storms, but will also help to reduce energy bills and provide more income for people to be able to allocate towards their rent and other needs. Next slide. So another example sort of in the natural environment area, and this is one that you all might have heard a lot about since back in 2017. Our office partnered with a number of partners, including the Science Museum of Virginia and Dr. Jeremy Hoffman, to conduct an urban heat island assessment of the city of Richmond to identify where we have neighborhoods that are actually hotter than others due to a number of factors like tree canopy and the amount of paved surfaces. what we see is that in those same neighborhoods, we also have a lot of overlap with things like health conditions that could be exacerbated by climate impacts such as extreme heat. In our community listening sessions, one of the sort of themes we heard is that people, this is kind of a no brainer, but they want their neighborhoods to be safe and beautiful and healthy, which includes access to green space. And so, as we think about strategies to do things like reduce the urban heat island effect, one of the ways we can do that is by providing more quality green space, more tree canopy, which can address a number of these inequities as well. Next slide. So for the last example, in sort of the waste area, one of the other themes that we heard in our community listening sessions was that in that sort of beautiful, safe neighborhoods category, litter is a big concern within certain neighborhoods. Excuse me. Uh-oh, allergies. We also know that nationwide, race is the number one predictor of whether a person will is living near some sort of like contaminated environment, whether that's air or the soil or something else. On the climate action and resilience side, for example, here in Richmond, one of the desires is to decrease emissions from our waste. And so among the strategies to do something like that is offering recycling, which is not currently offered to large multifamily buildings in terms of curb roadside recycling. And so if we were to expand programs and services and facilities that provide things like recycling, we can potentially also start to address issues such as litter. So again, those are just a few examples. You all probably have a lot more in your head relevant to your work, and we want you to bring those into today's discussion. We're not necessarily asking that every strategy address every community priority, but we will be looking for opportunities to do so. And happy to answer any questions that you all have.
Thank you so much, Brianne. I think that was good timing. You're starting to lose your voice. So what we're using to add those elements into our strategies is the equity screening tool. And if you'll remember, back in January, I think we worked on this in our working group, and it's been refined. And so it's organized into the 7 community priorities. And there was a PDF attached to the email reminder that I sent out this morning. If you wanted to open that or print it, that's a good reference, but it has the questions in it. So what we're going to be focusing on today are the 4 topical components. Now all 7 of them are important, but these 4 we're going to start with in the breakouts. So when you're looking at community wealth, you want to consider if or whether the strategy could create jobs or increase affordable housing or expand access to green space and improve health. So if for community wealth specifically, does this support historically disenfranchised communities through workforce development, contracting opportunities, or increased diversity of employees and staff across sectors? Is there language we could add to the strategy that allows benefits to be accessible to households and businesses throughout the community, particularly communities of color, low-income populations, and minority women and emerging small businesses? If the strategy already relates to that, that's great. We want to make a note of it in the tool that we're going to be using. But if it doesn't, we want to consider what some additional language could be to add to it. Workforce training opportunities, that's a big one. For housing and building priority considerations, think about, will this strategy reduce the number of families that are cost burdened by housing and transportation? Does this reduce inequities in housing and building quality related to health and safety? Could this increase access to housing in general and to home ownership? And then for neighborhoods, could this strategy expand access to healthy, clean, and accessible transportation? Could this strategy increase access to quality green space in historically disenfranchised communities? That was one of the examples Brianne went over. Could this increase and ensure long-term access to amenities in historically disenfranchised communities? And then for health and well-being, those priority considerations or questions you want to ask: does this address the health impacts of climate change? Could this reduce food insecurity? Could this reduce stress, anxiety, and depression and increase happiness? So those are the 4 topical subjects. These are the 3 more procedural elements of the equity screening tool. So the only reason we're not focusing on these first today, because they're very important, is that the community working group is creating objectives and strategies directly related to these that will be cross-cutting for all of our strategies. But definitely want everyone's feedback. So for racial equity and environmental justice, does it generate burdens to historically disenfranchised communities? Does this strategy acknowledge, respect, protect, and honor the culture, assets, and traditions of those communities? What communities would benefit the most from the proposed action? I think that's just number one in transportation, right? We're all thinking that. Educate in terms of engagement and communication. Does this strategy engage and empower historically disenfranchised communities in a meaningful, authentic, and culturally appropriate manner? And that's where you're coming from your own lived experience. We want to hear what you have to say. How have communities, including historically disenfranchised, been engaged? Does this help foster effective long-term relationships and trust between diverse communities and local government? And then on the government accountability side, has the community asked for this? Is there a mechanism in place to change the action as needed based on indicators and community feedback? Is it clear who is accountable to whom and for what? And what is the current data related to the proposed action? Where does it come from? And what does this data tell us? So hopefully all of these are kind of like setting bells off. This is information that came from the community. This is what they want to see in a really effective plan. Strategies that reflect all of those priorities. So for today's activity, like I said, we're going to be going through the draft strategies and making them smarty. So we're not focusing as much on measurable and time bound because those will come out in the implementation phase this summer. But today we do want to make them strategic, ambitious, and realistic. So when you go into your breakout, that's what you'll be doing first, is looking at the draft language. Is it strategic? Is it ambitious? Is it realistic? So an example would be the statement, reduce residential water consumption. That's not really a full strategy. So to make it better, we would say restructure residential water and wastewater fees and billing procedures to incentivize reduced water consumption. But then when we use our equity tool, we want to add additional language that's going to make it inclusive and equitable. So you might want to add this statement and use clear language and graphics to communicate fees and ways to reduce usage and charges. And then the second example, rather than just increase public parks access, how about establish an annual budget for the Parks, Recreation, and Community Facilities Department to acquire new public park space? And then to make it inclusive and equitable, you could go further and say, in neighborhoods with the highest urban heat island impacts. So that's kind of the level that we're looking for on these strategies. Actionable projects and programs that will be implemented to meet the goals and objectives. So for today, these objectives have been discussed and reworked and refined and lots of back and forth, and this is where we landed. The first objective, we're going to spend the whole hour, really more like an hour and 15 minutes on one objective. So you guys think about which one you want to spend that time on. The first one will be with me in the main room, and that's achieve climate neutrality in municipal fleet operations and increase resilience and stewardship of transportation infrastructure. Then the second objective is going to be with Kendra in breakout room 1, and that is create vibrant neighborhoods where all residents can easily ride transit, walk, or bike to meet daily needs in alignment with Richmond Connects. And so I believe all of you are way more rehearsed in this than I am, but Richmond Connects is the city's comprehensive multimodal transportation plan, and they're doing an update to it. So it's going to include an equitable mobility action plan and scenario plan, looking out to the 25-year planning horizon at the project level. So we are collaborating with the Office of Equitable Transportation and Mobility to make sure that the plans are in alignment. And so this is a really good opportunity to add language to our strategies that will support what's inform and support what's going into Richmond Connect's update. So that's objective 2. And then objective 3 will be in a second breakout room with Wendy, and that's transition the community rapidly and equitably to clean fuel vehicles and transit. So your tasks, let me see if I can pull that. So this is what the drafting guide looks like. And the facilitator will be the one sharing her screen, and taking notes. So all you have to do is discuss and use your expertise to make these strategies better. So the facilitator will walk you through the activity. So the first one with me has 9 strategies. With Kendra, there are 13 strategies. And then with Wendy, there are 6. So if say, for example, Wendy finishes all 6, I'm going to suggest that she go back up into here and start working from the bottom up in 2, since that is the one with the most. You'll see this is great discussion, and it, you know, you might not get to all of them. So that's why we're saying, actually, it looks like I need to add a column for draft strategies. So I'll do that during the 5-minute break we're going to have between now and then. But you're going to go through the strategies first and then add in the equity language if that's what makes sense to your group. So if you see someone else typing at the same time, don't worry. This is all, we want everyone's input anyway. So, but just so you know, it's Wendy, Kendra, and myself are the 3 people who will be typing in it, but everyone should be able to look at it. So Wendy, did you put the link to that in the chat? Or she will. For those who can't, who maybe don't have 2 monitors or can't share a screen or whatever. So with that, let me go back to the presentation. So what we're going to ask you to do, this is the link to the slide deck that I believe is in the chat. Lots of links. So if you open this, or you can just tell us and we'll type your name in, but we want to know which objective you want to spend the hour in. So again, objective 1 is the municipal fleet and operations and infrastructure. The objective 2 is the community-based, connect alignment with Richmond Connects. And then the third one is transition the community rapidly and equitably to clean fuel vehicles and transit. So go ahead and do that. We're going to have a 5-minute break. It's 1:25, so at 1:30, I will send you into your breakout rooms and we'll go from there. But in the meantime, does anyone have any questions for me? Okay, then we'll see you in 5 minutes. And then everyone will have access to this to continue to add input until 5 p.m. tomorrow. And then we have a lot of work to do to pull this together for the next stage. So let me go ahead and open all the rooms and I'll join you there in a minute. All right, I hope everyone who's left meant to stay back, so we're good. Let me share this. So we are 1, and I'm going to make this a little bigger so you can see it. So I'm going to give you a minute to read through these, and I will be right back. Okay, so the task, oh shoot, I meant to do this. Let me add a column. All right, so the task we have before us is to take this strategy, start with 1, develop a phased municipal fleet electrification plan for all vehicles and equipment, including electric cargo bikes and workplace charging stations. Is that, do you like that language as is, or should we revise that strategy to make it better? Is it strategic? Is it ambitious? Is it realistic?
So Dawn, when they were envisioning this, were they, like, I think about charging, right, for electric vehicles as part of this fleet. Would it be like all depot charging, or might it be spread across the city where it could be both infrastructure used by the municipal fleet, but was also available to the public?
It gets so complicated, right? When you start trying to figure out how to lay all that out, that whole plan. So, the first step I think is to just figure out, to make sure that the strategy creates something that's actionable to get us to where we want to be. So, right now, as we've been discussing public and municipal charging, like fleet charging versus public infrastructure, we
Yeah.
keep going back and forth and landing in different places. So at this level today, I don't think we're ready to say how we're going to do it, but we want to make sure that the language in the strategy sets up, you know, what's next. So
Yeah, well, so the reason I asked that question is, like, you might put something on the end of it that says, where possible, or where feasible, shared infrastructure or something like that.
The concept here of workplace charging stations, Dawn, also really is, that associates with the workers or the public.
Sorry.
I'm in the same boat. I have my dog growling right now, so.
Sorry that my children just came home from school. So. Charlie. Hey. That's annoying. Go ahead. I'm listening.
I was just going to mention with that last question, that workplace charging is not necessarily public stations, but those chargers are probably more public facing. You guys might be requiring your employees to pay a little bit to access those, or some of your workers may park in public lots. And so that's a piece of this. And then also Richmond has made some major progress on a municipal fleet electrification plans. And so you may want to, publish what you've got, or, start standing on those plans.
Okay, those are all great points. I think the workplace, you're right about the, it's too hard to combine the public with the private at this level. I think the workplace charging stations had to do more with, right now we have 4 chargers at City Hall. And if we were able to get them at the different, say, parks or wherever staff is going throughout the day, then maybe we could have more. I'm not sure. What would be a better way to say this?
This would be maybe a focus first on the municipal vehicles and the municipal employees, and then there'd be a separate component to your plan that would be for the rest of Richmond's motoring vehicles. And so the approach could be for, I guess you could change the term workplace charging to be fleet destination charging, or something different than workplace, because the term workplace charging is a loaded public infrastructure term that is about the personally owned vehicles of an organization being able to operate going from home to work.
Yeah, thank you. That's much better.
My input for that too is, if we kept it similar and we're focusing mostly on municipal, the municipal fleet, once we kind of add that lens of the screening tool in and kind of addressing, does it negatively impact community wealth because the community isn't going to have access to these charging stations or something.
What was the
That-
last thing you said? How
I'm
could it affect-
sorry, I probably sound terrible. So with like community wealth, for example, like the community would have, like if there's already charging stations that the city is using, why wouldn't the community also be able to use those charging stations, especially if it's, going to help them get into an electric vehicle because if they don't have access to one elsewhere. I'm sorry.
So maybe under community wealth, consider access to public. May not have alternative.
I'm sorry. I'm having a hard time. There's some feedback or something. I'm not too sure what that.
I'm hearing that too.
Julie, it might be your, yep.
Oh. I think we got it. Okay, so consider access to public who may not have other options for charging. Is that what you mean?
Mm-hmm.
While we're still on this one, do you want to just keep going across other and think about affordable housing, beautiful, safe neighborhoods, health? Is there any language we could add to this other than potential public access? That's a hard one to consider. I think, if we had it at community centers, that's one way I can think about, because staff will want to be charging, city fleets when they're going between like on the job stuff, but then if there was some way to also make that accessible, I don't know. Alan spent a lot more time thinking about this than us.
Well, when I think about that plus beautiful, safe neighborhoods, together, how, and it's not saying that this isn't fact, it's just applying that equity and that lens to it and just asking the question. So I am not a professional in this arena and I don't know. So I would also think that, beautiful and safe, beautiful neighborhoods, people using one central charging location within like a mile radius is more, it's nicer than to have a public and a private charging station that's also going to be using like municipal land most likely. So just being more efficient, not necessarily, separating those two out, if that would make things, not using up all these different areas, if that makes any sense.
No, that's helpful. I appreciate that. And I see Diane, you joined us. She's on mute.
So on this one, I also think, like, I don't know where your depots are or where you're like where you're maintaining your waste management vehicles, but anything surrounding those areas where you're parking your fleet tend to have higher concentrations of emissions, right? So that probably goes to both. I think that goes to both health and beautiful neighborhoods. And then, I don't know, I kind of think about this ways, even in those areas as they start to become more appealing, does that make the prices go up? The real estate property go up, the housing is less affordable? I don't know. But to me, definitely around the depots where the fleets are operated and maintained, you're going to see some improvement.
Yeah, that's a great point. I heard the term yesterday, eco-gentrification. So before we move forward, Diane, I know you joined us late, but we have 3 objectives that people are in breakout rooms with, and they're going to spend the whole hour on them. So this one is electrification of municipal fleet and resilience of municipal infrastructure. The second one is biking, walking, transit aligning with Richmond Connects, and the third one is community electrification. Which one would you like me to put you in? Oh, you're on mute. I just can't hear you, but. All right, so I'm gonna probably send you to 3. I think you could be really helpful in 3 because there are only a couple people there. And come back if you want to rejoin us. All right, thank you. All right, sorry, I cut someone off. You were, Alex, you had unmuted yourself at one point. Did you want to say something?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I guess the first thing, can I get some clarification on electric cargo bikes and what is that talking about, like bike share or available? I just don't know what that is.
That came from you guys, someone in our working group. Alan, do you know where that came from?
Yeah, so I spent some time in like Holland, and so this came up from the working team that I was in, and it wasn't just from me, but the example is that we use 2-ton vehicles to just move a person from block to block, and it requires a lot of infrastructure to store the vehicles and then to like drive the vehicle. And there might be some opportunities to have a lower sized piece of equipment. There will be a phenomenal return on investment in terms of the carbon or the cost for going to a cargo bike. And so a lithium ion supported electric bicycle can actually move a person or, you know, laptop computers, et cetera. And then they can also get in and out of neighborhoods. And then they also add to the public, the health component. And so as we consider the getting to zero carbon, it's going to be a real big challenge if we're just still maintaining the, you know, all the pavement and, you know, having to deal with all the chargers, et cetera. So that's the comment about cargo bike. So a cargo bicycle is it's just like a little bit beefier than a bicycle. And it would allow you could move all sorts of material. So you could move hundreds of pounds of like lawn equipment or other equipment in essentially a tricycle style bicycle, or even a bicycle with just an extended cargo back. And that might be suitable for a lot of the duty cycle for Parks and Rec or for other types of departments. And it could be a $1,000 vehicle instead of a $30,000 vehicle.
Yeah, no, that sounds really great. I would definitely use one of those.
Like the bikers love to just dump their little Kubotas and switch over to them. So it's
yeah, I definitely, you should see the amount of bags and like things attached to my bike every morning. It's ridiculous. And that's just powered by my legs. So if there is something electric.
So like you could give up your parking spot and the city could ask you to ride an electric bike instead of the cars or whatever. Yeah. And especially right now, as we're considering the challenges of transit, there may be sort of a renaissance opportunity for these lithium battery bicycles. Right now, they might be a little expensive, like top end ones are like $4,000, but the pricing is likely to come down pretty quick with motor quality and battery quality, et cetera. So like a good bicycle for $1,200.
That made me think of how we bring in affordable housing here, because I don't know all of the property tax prices in Richmond, but if you lower the city's budget or economic requirements, there's a potential to reduce real estate taxes, which gets passed on to the people that live in the area. So it could put downward pressure on real estate.
Great.
And
I like it.
we might have already touched on this, But could part of the strategy be also including charging stations out in the field, like that could be used by public, but also for fleet vehicles that might be out for several hours in the day and need a recharge instead of having to drive back to, I don't know where it came from in Southside or City Hall.
Yeah, I
But
think that's what we were getting at in the beginning. It's hard to think about how to do that. We keep in our office just taking the plan that Alan referenced earlier and trying to figure out how we actually roll that out in Richmond is more complicated than it should be.
yeah,
But yeah, if we could consider, if Parks has, kind of 4 hubs, then maybe you would put charging stations in at those hubs.
mhm.
But then actually making them publicly accessible. You have swipe cards with different programming, and it's all possible.
So then that gets into that beautiful neighborhoods question or some of the equity questions, which is what is the most that can be done to expand like backup charger access into all neighborhoods in Richmond. I will say that sideways from this, we are looking at the racial equitable distribution of electric vehicle chargers. And in Virginia, they're color coded. And so in Richmond, Virginia, there's some real equity challenges to where the public DC fast charging is, for example. And that's on us from early planning, but I think we can come back around and try to prioritize making all neighborhoods beautiful and safe with with some reasonable accommodation for neighborhood charging, like what was mentioned with the a charger every mile or whatever, charger a mile away.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is applicable for here, but so I'm with the urban design committee, and we get a lot of city projects to review, and there's kind of like standard design guidelines for every public project that we always recommend. And I'm wondering if in the future, as we update our guidelines, if I just reviewed improvements at a fleet facility in Southside, or I reviewed like a new school going in. It's like, what if part of that review process was to see if that location just like could put in 2 charging stations or something, and steadily like you could have them out in the community, because these projects that the city does, just are in every community essentially throughout the year. So instead of like, one of our recommendations is always like, consider undergrounding utilities. It's like, well, what if it was consider putting in 2 charging stations? Is it feasible? I don't know, but we're asking the question.
Absolutely. All right, this is great. Y'all are on it. On the second one, incorporate alternative fuel vehicles into fleet electrification to include negative carbon opportunities and resilience measures. Do you like that statement as is, or should we modify it?
Can I jump over? I mean, there was also the government accountability ... and the equitable engagement, the HIJs. Would it be possible to talk about that for just 1 second?
Yes.
The White House released an updated social cost of carbon, which is a term that is supposed to help government planners analyze what a ton of CO2 costs over time. And Dawn, I can send you a direct message of the link to this, but it's basically already, if you're buying a vehicle, it's already going to cost society like $2 a gallon for it to be gasoline. And it might be really good that could be a cross-cutting way to reference carbon in government accountability, is to disclose the carbon, and then also to mention this for the gasoline vehicle purchases, for that phasing.
Tell me what that's called so I can reference it here.
It's called the social cost of carbon.
And it's a federal guideline.
And it's a federal guideline that was adopted by Virginia as well. And it applies a cost basically to the federal one, applies a cost to America for every ton of CO2.
Okay.
or methane or NOx, but it's, yeah. I'm sorry, or methane. So it's just like for every ton of CO2. And so that cost is,
Okay. Got it.
and I'll put that link in there, but it's just that'd be a way for government to be accountable, is to just, you could start thinking in terms of what's that cost, and maybe explaining this if it's of value to everything. Yeah. And so it's worth a read. I'll put the White House post in there, but it came out it's part of our Paris stuff.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Sorry. So then the next one, incorporate alternative fuel vehicles into fleet electrification to include negative carbon opportunities and resilience measures. Feedback, please.
I have a question about it. Is it saying that until you can get to 100% electric, you should bridge with alternative fuel?
Yes, and I think Alan can speak to this because he brought it up a lot.
Carrie, this is a good note. GRTC operates a bunch of natural gas vehicles, and those are a little bit lower carbon, but you can also use renewable natural gas or like biofuels. There's a facility in Richmond that makes biodiesel, and so there's a little bit of net carbon that you could reduce if Richmond needs to operate some fossil fuel vehicles temporarily before they can switch immediately to electric. So during that phased approach, you guys could still be reporting on positive incremental change just by doing the fuel switch for what you already have.
Is that fuel switch something that, so I don't understand logistically how it would work. CNG fuels the tanks up top. To my knowledge, it's not possible to swap the CNG with something else.
And so it's just for each of the different things, it would be different. So some of your vehicles operate on diesel, and so there's a biodiesel. There's also a thing called renewable diesel, which is just taking waste oil and then doing the same diesel making process. So it's like it's a renewable fuel. With natural gas, you can just buy renewable natural gas. It's actually a product that Dominion sells in other states, and it's basically taking like the hog waste and turning it into a biogas, and then it goes into the pipeline. Same thing with so like 33% of natural gas vehicles in the US are powered just by renewable natural gas, and Richmond could do that with its natural gas vehicles. It has a natural gas utility, so it could be a natural fit, but it's not just renewable natural gas. It could be the ethanol. So if there are fleet vehicles that have a yellow gas cap, you could go to Sheetz in Richmond and refill with 85% decarbonized renewable fuel.
Great.
And I'm sorry, there's just too much in my head about all this. What I could do is I could just pledge whatever support Richmond would need to write up any of this stuff. But the idea would be there may be some bridges to lean on as you're working on your phased. So there's that phased approach. Well, some of those vehicles might not be ready today.
So
there
the
might be
first
some.
one gets at develop a phased municipal fleet electrification plan. And the second one is incorporating alternative fuel vehicles into that. So,
It's
they
just
could
part of the
almost be
phase.
combined, but they will have separate implementations. So we'll get to that this summer, but for now, if we can stick to the strategy level statement, is there anything should we revise that to make it stronger, or do you like it as is?
It says into fleet electrification, and it could be something that'd be like, supporting gaps in fleet electrification, or supporting bridges to the phases. So I'm sorry, and that is to say that, for example, if you want trash trucks, but you can't do all electric trash trucks, you can only do a couple electric trash trucks. Well, maybe and trash truck's not a great example, but it's like maybe there's a few. I'm sorry. So just to fill in the gaps.
Okay.
continued decarbonization. Yeah.
Okay, feel free to go back in this later if you have an epiphany. Okay, 3, implement a smart cities infrastructure through technologies prioritizing pedestrian safety and multi-mobility efficiency. So this is getting at the city's, streetlight infrastructure or other resilience measures that the city would own and be in charge of.
So where would we put transit signal priority for like the transit buses? Is that with this one or is that like number 3?
Say that again.
So transit signal priorities, when the transit bus approaches the traffic signal, does it get the light? Does it know what the light is and it moves through? That creates energy efficiency for the bus.
Yep.
Is that what we're talking about? Smart city infrastructure? Is that an example of that? And would that go here, or is that in the third group?
I think that would fall under this technology, and there might be aspects of it that would be included somewhere else too. But
Okay.
so that gets at beautiful, safe neighborhoods, I guess. Yeah, this smart cities infrastructure. You all probably, some of you might know more about it than I do, but it's so we're transitioning our streetlights to LED, but then there are all kinds of great new opportunities to add ears to these streetlights that would then maybe even hear a gunshot and call the police on site, or increase. It would sense the traffic. Some of them have electric vehicle charging stations or underground charging as the bus pulls up. I mean, the city of the future is pretty amazing. So,
Does Richmond have a challenge with internet access? Would this be something that could also help beautify and improve neighborhoods or improve equity by the smart infrastructure, including extending networking to people?
okay. Yeah.
So this to me is like, you guys have the big belly trash cans in Richmond. So it's like, how do you use smart city infrastructure to make your operations more efficient? Not just so less vehicle miles traveled. That's a big deal for each of these vehicles, so they last longer. To me, this smart city infrastructure means a lot as far as reducing the budget expenses to operate your municipal fleet, which kind of puts me back to this community wealth and real estate taxes for affordable housing. And believe me, the less times the trash truck goes down the street, the better the neighborhood is, right? That's where my mind goes with that one.
Excellent. You're exactly right.
I do think there's a unique component around this pedestrian safety, but I haven't wrapped my head around how I explain it to you all.
Okay, we'll keep thinking about it and add that in. And you guys feel free to revise these strategies and make them better. This will be going out to the public, and so we want even the language to be accessible to everybody. Okay, 4, reduce emissions in city operations through employee commute alternatives, efficient routing, and enforcement of the anti-idling policy.
I think there are obvious health implications from the better air quality from all of that. it might be that it could be modeled. You could model how much. So yeah, I don't know.
This is Carrie. The phrase efficient routing is kind of not sitting right with me, simply because I'm in the weeds with bus routing. What is the most efficient route may not be the route that is needed because of where people need the bus route. So you might have routes like in Churchill, for example, that are doing all sorts of turns and nooks and crannies to serve as many of the communities as possible there. So is that the most fuel efficient routing? No, but it is the necessary routing. So maybe optimal routing, because you're optimizing what's necessary for the community, not solely looking at emissions. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Yeah, that where my mind goes is to kind of to use like the racial equity,
Yeah.
equitable
Yes.
engagement portions and kind of pick that apart a little bit more, because that's a good
Yeah, I mean, if we were just using efficient routing, we would do Main Carry, Belvedere Broad, we would just hit straight shot roads, but then you'd be leaving out Randolph, you'd be leaving out the senior towers off of Riverside. We still have to serve these groups because to them, 5 blocks is, another state to them, and they really do need another option.
Here in Harrisonburg, so I'm going to give a out-of-town perspective on kind of the neighborhood, beautiful neighborhoods here, or if we could make, if it was more convenient for employees, or if it was very convenient and safe for employee commute alternatives to be safe, it would be better and safer neighborhoods or whatever. So if city employees could commute to downtown safely from their neighborhoods, it would really hit that beautiful, safe neighborhoods thing. So like focus on employee commutes would benefit all sorts of neighborhoods for that bicycling piece. Alex might have some thoughts here as a bike commuter.
Yeah. I agree with that completely. I think, I'm not sure if this would fit into the strategy, but one thing that's really impacted me is, I guess we don't really think about it, but in the summertime, say you're a bike from Northside, by the time I get to City Hall, I'm drenched. Like I never bike in the clothes that I'm gonna wear that day. And I don't have an office, and City Hall also doesn't have showers or locker rooms or anything. I think the 700 building does, but I don't work in that building. So, maybe part of the alternative commuting options would be also to make sure that at the destination, there's facilities for, getting dressed, or a place to just, fix yourself up before you go into the office.
Or there might be some flexibility in how we require people to dress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess it's not even like it's less of like, oh, I'm embarrassed to walk in like wearing my bike shorts or something, and more just I literally need a shower. Deodorant can only cover up so much. That was probably TMI, but I mean.
No, that reminds back in
We're
Jackson
humans.
County, the director of general services rode his bike to work every day, and so we had a shower in the bathrooms at our office. So
Yeah. So just something to think about.
Alex, we just installed a shower at our workplace, kind of for this fantasy. And it may be an important component to a facilities plan for biking and other routing to actually mention that keyword.
Yeah, it's definitely a thing other places. I'm not sure how many city buildings have it. I just know of one at this time, which I've never been to.
That kind of brings up, and I know I'm backtracking just a little bit, but when it comes to pedestrian safety and the use of technologies, I know that, sidewalks aren't meant as a technology, but I live in a semi-walkable neighborhood, but I don't because Borough Bridge Road, people it's just dangerous. So one beautiful day I might want to walk to the river, but I'm going to drive because I'm with my 2-year-old and I don't feel safe walking with him down the street. So it's a burden. I hate driving. I would rather walk and ride the bus, but sometimes safety is a factor. I don't know if that would go in under 3 somewhere.
Well, prioritizing pedestrian safety using the smart cities infrastructure, and then in the second objective, I think they're talking about other ways to add safety and resilience to our infrastructure.
Okay.
So hopefully revisit that though as we get into implementation to make sure that it's sufficient language. Okay, how about reestablish continuity for pedestrians between disconnected areas to promote stewardship of the connectivity of our transportation infrastructure?
Yes, yes, and yes. So I think this is good as it is. I guess the how I might be missing here a little bit.
Can you give me an example of, I'm having a hard time visualizing this. Can you give me an example of what this looks like in a perfect world?
Someone, I think it was when we were talking about the risk assessment, people were saying that there are sections where the sidewalk and the bike lane is disconnected, and so you can see that we need biking, walking infrastructure everywhere. So just because a sidewalk ends and a bike walks over here, we need to connect the two to make and then
Gotcha.
in neighborhoods, maybe there's a dead end road and people are walking through the woods to get to the sidewalk on the other side.
You mean literally disconnected? I was thinking more like socially disconnected or something. I was like, what? Okay, gotcha. That clicks.
So this might just be very.
Go ahead.
It's also just like you said, Angela. You don't want to walk across Robius because it's so like what how do you either modify that infrastructure or what do you put in there to make it more pedestrian friendly so you can go across the river?
And this might just be overly critical, but the term reestablish continuity, could we maybe, and thinking of like sidewalks and bike lanes, I think it's more of like we're establishing greater continuity rather than reestablishing it, because I don't know if it actually has existed in some locations.
Fair.
But it's great. Every time I go out, I see a new bike lane. So I'm like, it's happening.
Great. Are there any components of this? I started to think community wealth. We've been talking about jobs and commuting. Connecting sidewalks allows people to walk to work rather than having to drive a car or pay for the bus or.
It's also inclusive, people with disabilities and that use.
Okay. How about develop a maintenance plan for a resilient transportation infrastructure, prioritizing scheduled upgrades for all bridges, roads, sidewalks, and alleyways on an ongoing basis.
So I go back to what Alex said earlier about, not only should we develop a maintenance plan, but at that point in time, is that when you make modifications to make them more sustainably friendly, more neighborhood friendly, more in line with this plan?
Mhm. And I think if there's something that says prioritize scheduled upgrades, we have to add the equity lens in there somewhere, because we're doing this now, but if this is going to be an ongoing thing, then this needs to be assessed for those upgrades as well.
Alex, can you think of any other language to add to that that would make it more realistic?
I'm thinking. Well, I like the idea of, you know, doing it as you can, as these projects come through. But like Angela said, how do you make sure it's consistent and not just, we'll get to it when it comes to our desk, you know? Is there any
So
language
to me that
we could add
to
about?
me that maybe sorry, Alex. I was just thinking like maybe the way you score them or prioritize them or rank them has to have that equity lens in there.
Can I make a quick note that Richmond would be eligible to apply for a $1 billion fund for exactly this category if you had projects in mind. And that is now going to be an annual program. It's the INFRA program from the U.S. Department of Transportation. It's open right now, but if Richmond could plan for resilient transportation, it could actually pay for everything on this list. And so if we could be more aggressive in our planning, we could drop in some pretty tasty asks. It would pay for electrification. It would pay for other reduced emissions in transit. It would pay for the installation of sidewalks and et cetera.
Okay, let's revisit that with implementation. I like where you guys were going with the equity lens though. So I think if we add that language to the strategy, that would be helpful. How could we say this?
So that's where I think priority comes in. Like, how do you prioritize your maintenance plan?
Yeah, what are you prioritizing it against is what you're saying.
So
Yeah.
a maintenance plan for a resilient transportation infrastructure using the climate equity lens to prioritize scheduled upgrades.
Using the climate equity
Yeah.
lens for scheduled upgrades to prioritize scheduled. Yeah, that makes.
Or index to prioritize. The reason that scheduled is in there, I think that came from Richmond 300. So I guess do we wait for the upgrades to come up in the CIP or per some budget year, or do we actually create a plan that schedules them every so often? What's the smarter way to do this?
What is your level of service for bicycling paths and walkways and these alternatives? Do you guys have a pretty good level of service? In Harrisonburg, which is my frame of reference, we lack sidewalks, and we have a lot of unsafe areas for that portion of the transportation. But we do have really good road surfaces.
It's all over the place.
So do you want to have a certain, you want to plan for a certain level of service or be aware of that before even scheduling the upgrades, know what you need? If it's all over the place, how is that helpful for equity or for, comprehensive neighborhoods?
I think at the, like, once this is, like, the develop a maintenance plan, for some reason, my mind is going to, like, once we're there, once we have accomplished and implemented these things and we've put in, then that this is moving forward. I don't know if I'm understanding that correctly.
We just don't, in Harrisonburg, I can say this because it's just different geography. We just don't prioritize sidewalks. We never build a new sidewalk unless that building is being torn down and rebuilt. And so once we've gone through it and we don't have a sidewalk, or we have a crappy sidewalk, or we have a mailbox or a utility pole in the middle of the sidewalk, we never go back.
Mhm.
And when we do scheduled upgrades for roads, we skip the sidewalks.
Mhm.
And so that might be a challenge to resilient transportation infrastructure that could service multiple types of vehicles if it's like a car only. And I don't know if that's the same plan that Richmond has. I'm just sharing it from my lens of experience, which is like it's car only in Harrisonburg. It's unsafe to do anything else.
Any other thoughts on that? Oh, that one goes up here. Okay, develop a climate resiliency plan for all surface materials and coatings used in transportation infrastructure to reduce the impacts of heat and flooding.
Mm.
So this one's interesting because I was just thinking about 6 and now you put me in a 7. And I think like you have a maintenance plan for resilient transportation infrastructure for bridges, roads, and sidewalks. But then, what are, you don't have a maintenance plan for green space, right?
Yeah, so would you suggest, I started putting this all in one, then I was like, oh, wait a minute, that's just too much. So I'm
Yeah.
open to any ideas, but maybe, I think the maintenance plan speaks to like, public works, but then the climate resiliency plan might be more of like a planning document, but maybe they need to be combined somehow. I don't know.
I'm kind of going back to what Alan was saying about like, do you include sidewalks, really as part of, that true public works, but then should you also be including trees? To me, like at some point, these surface materials should start to blend where green space and, it's not concrete anymore. It's, some sort of aggregate or, open surface that's greener. I don't know. I'm just thinking kind of outside the box a little bit, that type of road service that grows grass in the middle of it. Or there's trees or like, to me, it's all kind of together. And maybe how do you incorporate more of that surface material coatings that's greener into the above as well?
I don't have an answer.
Also, are heat and flooding the only things that
One
impact
thing,
surface material?
well, I guess this would be flooding. I was going to say one of the big things I always run across is erosion, but I guess that can fall into flooding.
Does like cold weather impact it at all? I just don't know.
Yeah, I mean, even with climate change, even though the overall average temperature is going up, climate change also weakens the jet stream up around the Arctic, which lets it get really wavy and allows Arctic air to come down more often and easier, which is what happened last month in Texas and the plains and the deep south. So I think that's a fair question to consider changing it to reduce the impacts of, instead of heat and flooding, say the impacts of extreme weather, because it's all of it.
I like that.
I'd love to hear more thoughts about combining them or separating them in a way that makes each one more defined. I'm not sure. Any suggested language?
So you have like surface materials and coatings, but I also think it's like all the building materials, right?
Yes. Also, for all building material. For all building materials and coatings.
Well, the bad thing, the building might not be the best word because then now we're thinking about buildings instead of transportation. Maybe it's construction materials.
Or I mean, I guess you could include buildings that are facilities used around like public transit.
Yeah, that would fall under buildings and energy though. And they're considering resilience measures in our buildings. So this is really the road.
So Dawn, I think separating them is okay because one is kind of a plan of how you look at when you're gonna go after these things, and the second one is more about like, let's implement a more improved, like when we do new construction or maybe when we're maintaining, let's do it in a way that really considers extreme weather and flooding, right?
Yes. Should I say used in new and existing, or just leave it? Develop a climate resiliency plan for all construction materials and coatings used in transportation infrastructure to reduce the impacts of extreme weather and flooding.
I think that includes both.
Okay. Can you think
New, remodel.
So we haven't really addressed opportunities for jobs in any of these. Community wealth, workforce training, new attracting, minority-owned businesses, or how this could help establish new minority-owned businesses, or in neighborhoods where there might be struggling. Maybe as part of the maintenance plan, we already have contractor, there's language in there to promote small minority-owned businesses, women-owned, but
Are there any higher local requirements?
I think that language is in there already. I guess new, like workforce training. Can you think of? Well, probably.
So what?
I was just going to say, if Richmond has these expectations, then we probably need to hold, regular trainings to let our contractors know what the expectation is in terms of workforce development.
So like, are you partnering with the local universities and community colleges so that their programs include like concepts of a climate resiliency plan or technologies and construction and building material techniques that would reduce extreme weather and flooding. So if you want people to know how this works, like if you want to hire local people, then local people have to be trained in these areas.
Yep. Okay.
That actually kind of goes for all of them, the electrification and the biofuels.
Yeah. Okay, how about form a task force to incorporate climate resiliency measures into emergency management routing and planning. So this city would put this team together, this task force. I think this came out of Richmond 300. Any suggestions on adding any language to that to make it more equitable?
We can form a task force of whom? Do we want like community members? Do we want that? Should it look more like professionals that work in the field? How can we bring equity into how can the task force, kind of like we're doing here with the, I'm sorry?
Of community stakeholders?
Or neighborhoods. Yeah, community stakeholders.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe it's community stakeholders and emergency responders.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Implement pricing.
So
Julie, did you have something?
yeah, because I'm thinking about Texas. So like this resiliency, emergency management, routing and planning, like this is a big deal that has like intense impacts, more so on marginalized communities than necessarily others. So like, can we like change the strategy a little bit so
Sure.
that it kind of has that comma on the end, that says, is focused on that like I don't want to say minimizes, but mitigates the impact to marginalized communities, something like that. Maybe someone else can jump in here, but that like may like specifically meets the needs or something like.
Also, this may be a chance, Carrie, for transit to weigh in the event that a emergency situation, such as what was experienced in Texas or massive flooding, et cetera, DRPT would be a key component of that task force, just to help get people out and to emergency. So say, what if Richmond got hit by a massive cold snap that overwhelmed things? There'd need to be some sort of evacuation and then facility stuff.
Yeah, I'm wondering if instead of the phrase emergency responders, would subject matter experts encompass anyone who might need to be at the table?
Yeah, it's almost a scenario planning,
Yeah.
AHJs or subject matter experts.
I mean, a practical example are our snow routes that we already have in effect. We met with the city to get what are their priority 1 and 2 roads. And then those are the only roads that we run on during snow routes because we know that those will get treated first. And it'll probably be safest for us to operate on those. That's, a practical example of what this task force might be doing.
And at the state level, it might be like VDEM, but one question I might have is Richmond the recipient of evacuees from the Tidewater area in
Yeah.
the law? So
Yeah.
so like that could be part of this as well, is preparing to take care of our brothers.
So, okay, so form a task force of community stakeholders and subject matter experts to incorporate climate resiliency measures into emergency management routing and planning while mitigating the impact and meeting the needs of marginalized communities.
Is it climate resiliency measures, or is it possible that this is a climate catastrophe or event?
Climate
Weather event. It might be a question about weather events rather than about climate resiliency. I can't remember whether this is about recovery.
So there are 2 Richmond 300 strategies. One is form a task force that's gonna help to plan for the impact of climate change. And then the other one had to do with the routing, emergency routing. So trying to combine those into a statement that says what we want it to, I guess, is what we're going for.
Now I think I'm lost.
All right, so we want to form a task force of all the right people that can help plan for impacts of, well, I guess what was the language used before? Extreme weather and flooding, the impacts of climate change, to meet the needs of marginalized communities.
So is this task force to deal with like how might we better deal with an event that happens happened in Texas because we know weather is more severe, or is it more about how do we, like, we're starting to make changes to the infrastructure, etc. Like if you go all electric, do you now have to stage EV charging along the way as you evacuate? Like, I guess kind of which one is it?
So that's a good point, but I think the second part of what you said will come into the resilience of the individual strategies. So we need to be thinking about those.
Okay.
So I think it has more to do with the first part of what you said.
So then to me, climate resiliency measures probably isn't the right word. Maybe it's form a task force to contemplate, or form a task force to
Prepare for, or
yeah more increasingly severe climate events, or maybe we flip it around.
Do you think we need to take out the routing and planning and just make that part of implementation? Actually, you said something before and I lost it. Increasingly extreme weather events, or
Maybe it could be like predictably extreme, or using reference case, modeled expected extreme weather events. The group could look at what happens and could plan for what may happen. Looking at Texas, looking at Hurricane Sandy.
Keep thinking of that flood model your professor showed us that one day on our one of our groups, like how the floods are getting so much worse, it's even more impacted areas. And like, is emergency management planning really thinking about that at this point?
yeah, that's a good question. I asked, not in Richmond, but another emergency, management director for another jurisdiction, what are you doing to address climate change? And she said that language wasn't really part of their planning. They're just planning for hurricanes and whatever the natural disaster is. So I think this is an opportunity for us to elevate that, language in the planning.
And maybe that's it. Maybe it's for a task force to re-examine emergency management plans in the context of extreme weather events. And severity of impact. This is where I kind of then go on to, you have to look at it on a community basis, not on a holistic basis.
All right, am I missing anything? Are there any other equity considerations to add to this? I think COVID has kind of been and has given us an opportunity to look at these unforeseen events that then impact, the marginalized communities. So if we had the opportunity to plan for some kind of unforeseen impact like that, is there something we can do related to jobs and community wealth or affordable housing? When it comes to emergency management or this task force? Maybe provide, stipends for people who want to ask to be on the task force.
What
Yeah,
about
definitely. Sorry, go ahead.
I lost my thought. Oh my gosh. What about, is there a way to determine like what areas, like we have so many maps with a lot of data showing, you know, what areas are less invested in or have like, is there a way to find out like what areas of the city might benefit from being like evacuated first, or having buses sent to certain neighborhoods, or you know, using all those great maps we have to see what areas might need a little bit more attention if there was an actual emergency needing to get people out of there, providing them with goods.
Yeah, that's great.
And I'm not sure what the structure is. I know when I worked for Henrico, we had like a emergency response team. So since we're looking at, hold on, maybe we're looking at transportation and mobility within the municipality, right?
Yeah, so achieve climate neutrality in municipal fleet operations and increase resilience and stewardship of
Okay.
infrastructure.
Okay. So I don't know if that's here, but I keep thinking of like city employees. So this probably isn't what my thought process probably wasn't appropriate for this.
Well, maybe. I mean, it's an operational consideration. So yeah, go ahead and finish your thought.
So just thinking about, current strategies for emergency responses, um, shelters and all of those things that current city employees, I believe, are kind of tasked at manning if there were to be a natural disaster, what those strategies are now and how they can become more effective or climate friendly. I don't know.
Yeah, so I used to work for Corpus Christi, Texas when Hurricane Harvey hit. And the week after, we got assigned certain tasks. And one of them was going into neighborhoods you would get paired up with somebody, and you'd go into neighborhoods with little GIS device, like an app on your phone, and you could rate damage on individual structures. And then that data was used to be sent off to FEMA to determine how much relief we received. So I don't know if that's what you're getting at, but
I mean, and that, I guess,
and I don't know if we do that in Richmond because I haven't been working here when I don't know what my responsibility would be, but
yeah,
there it's like in the
thinking
field
about,
data collection.
yeah, thinking about equity in disaster response, when it comes to something climate change or the whether that is a product thereof, how to make that response equitable as well, I guess.
Yeah, and maybe some of our strategies for determining, like in this instance, what is considered minor, major, or not a lot of damage is not equitable, because what may on the outside just be like, oh, a tree fell, this is minor damage. You know, what else is going on in that area that might be more significant, impacting the people that live there. So
like, are you putting a dollar amount on a home, or are you looking at how many people were affected, or
yeah, that's a really good point.
Okay. All right. Well, one more, and we just have a couple minutes. So implement congestion pricing go zones to reduce travel demand and boost ridership per vehicle, both public and private. This was a best practice from our modeling consultants. Is that something that we would want to incorporate into Richmond strategies, or
what's a go zone?
Alan?
Man, I really appreciate the I'm sorry. I hope that I'm not being helpful here. We don't need to so in Richmond you can take a car anywhere in 15 minutes. And because of that convenience, everybody always takes a car everywhere for that 15 minutes, but there's 15% of the population that doesn't. I'd say everybody, but I'm saying a statistically heavy portion of people make those trips. If you couldn't get your car, into that zone, you do something else instantly. And so this gets back to that Holland piece of road diets, make the road less convenient, or simply have some streets that are expecting to be entirely pedestrian or bicycle. And so we've already got a lot of one-way streets down by the Capitol. The Capitol complex itself is locked off. You can't drive on that. That's an example. And you walk on it. And so maybe there's some other streets that would be walkable or bikeable that could be used. And then ultimately, this no-go access zone, which some cities are doing globally, would allow the city to start leveraging against that single occupancy vehicle and encouraging transit ridership.
So I think now that you're saying all of that, there's a lot of language in Objective 2 that covers like closing streets and all that kind of stuff. But I see in parentheses there's public and private. So I wonder if any of our government properties we would want to limit vehicles. I can't think of what an example would be.
Well, I know it for City Hall, a lot of the city, and this is kind of seen as a nuisance, but I mean, we don't have a lot of parking spots. So employees, we get our GRTC pass, so we can take the pulse, and that's literally the reason I started biking to work. But it's forced people to not drive in. So I don't know if like limiting parking at city facilities. I mean, but then again, that I don't know, because that might.
So do you have a zoning requirements where businesses are required to have parking, and then you guys get to violate that because you're the city itself?
I'm not sure. I know definitely with like certain developments, depending what zone they're in, they don't need to provide parking, like a TOD. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely zones where developments don't have to put in parking.
So if this is already incorporated into strategy 2, then and if it was from maybe something I said, we could just delete it. That could be a good way to get down to 8 goals instead of 9.
Yeah, I think that we'll move that. So well, folks are going to start coming back into this space, but you guys have been fantastic. Thank you so much. I can't believe we got through all of them. You hit all of the equity tool discussions. So it'll be really interesting to see what the other groups came up with. Hey, folks.
Thank you.
I think we have one more group coming back. Kendra's the big one. All right. Hey, folks. All right, so any feedback from that activity? Takeaways you want to share with the rest of us? Everyone is brain dead at this point, huh? It was a good process, right? It's kind of gets you thinking in a way that, really comprehensively that we don't always do. So, so with that, the homework is to continue adding your input to the drafting strategies guide that we just went through as a group. So go ahead and if you think of anything else that you want to add to the objective you worked on, please do. If you want to go back and read the other 2 objectives and see what, what folks added and provide your own input, that would be fantastic. So again, till tomorrow at 5, please feel free to add what you want. Our next meeting is in 3 weeks. So we will see you back here on Thursday, March 25th. Wendy's putting a link to the survey in the chat. If you have any feedback for us today, please fill that out. And we're done with our portion. If you guys have anything you want to share with the rest of the group, feel free to take yourself off mute or put anything you would like in the chat. Otherwise, I will say adieu, and I'll see you next time. And I'll be on this line for a few more minutes if anyone wants to hang around and ask any questions. Thank you.
Thank you all.
I just had something to say really quick.